Have you ever spent your entire life being told you were worthless? Lady Charlotte Ashford had. For 22 years, her father made certain she never forgot it. Stand up straight, Charlotte. Try not to embarrass yourself, Charlotte. Why can't you be more like your sister? The words followed her everywhere. They followed her through childhood. They followed her through every family gathering. They followed her into adulthood like a shadow she could never escape. And tonight, as hundreds of nobles filled the royal spring ball, they followed her once again. For heaven's sake, Charlotte, Lord Ashford muttered beneath his breath, at least pretend to look happy. Charlotte forced a smile while standing beside him near the centre of the grand ballroom. Golden chandeliers glittered overhead. Music drifted through the palace as noblemen and noblewomen danced across polished marble floors. Everywhere Charlotte looked, people seemed happy, except her. Her father adjusted his jacket and smiled proudly toward the crowd. "Now, Isabella," he said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear, "there is a daughter any father would be proud of." Charlotte's stomach tightened. Beside them, Isabella Ashford glowed beneath the ballroom lights. Her younger sister wore a breathtaking gold gown adorned with pearls. Her dark hair had been arranged perfectly. Not that Isabella needed the help. She was beautiful. Everyone knew it. The kingdom practically worshipped her. Isabella offered Charlotte a small sympathetic glance. Unfortunately, sympathy was all she ever offered. She never defended Charlotte, never challenged their father, never stopped the comparisons. She simply benefited from them. "Father," Isabella said softly, "please." But Lord Ashford only laughed. "What?" It's true. Several nearby nobles chuckled politely. Charlotte lowered her eyes. She had learned long ago that silence hurt less than arguing. Then disaster struck. A young servant carrying a tray of champagne hurried through the crowd. Someone stepped backward unexpectedly. The servant stumbled. The tray slipped. Glasses shattered across the floor. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. The young servant froze in horror, red-faced and terrified. He couldn't have been older than 16. Laughter erupted almost immediately. "Careless fool! How embarrassing! He'll lose his position for that." The boy dropped to his knees, desperately trying to gather broken glass with shaking hands. Charlotte didn't think. She simply moved. Before anyone could stop her, she knelt beside him. "Careful," she said quietly. "You'll cut yourself." The servant looked up in shock. "My lady!" Charlotte ignored the stares. She picked up a linen napkin and began helping him gather the broken pieces. "It's all right," she said gently. "Accidents happen." The boy's eyes filled with gratitude. Across the ballroom, an older steward hurried over to assist. The crisis ended almost as quickly as it began. Charlotte rose and returned to her place beside her family. But something felt different. She couldn't explain it. Across the room, a tall man dressed entirely in black had been watching. His expression never changed, yet his eyes lingered on her for several moments before he looked away. Charlotte didn't recognize him. She soon forgot about it. Her father certainly didn't. "Honestly," Lord Ashford sighed. "Must you always draw attention to yourself?" Charlotte stared at him. "I helped a frightened servant." "You embarrassed yourself." Charlotte bit the inside of her cheek. She should have been used to this by now. But somehow it still hurt. Then the musician stopped playing. Immediately, the ballroom grew quiet. The king had arrived. All conversations ceased as His Majesty entered with members of the royal household. After formal greetings, the evening resumed. But not before Lord Ashford raised his glass. "Friends," he announced loudly. A familiar dread settled inside Charlotte's stomach. She knew that tone. Her father loved public speeches. Tonight is a special occasion. Several guests gathered closer. As many of you know, House Ashford has long served the crown faithfully. More applause. And I am proud to present the future of our family. He extended a hand toward Isabella. "My daughter, Lady Isabella Ashford." The crowd applauded enthusiastically. Isabella smiled gracefully. Charlotte remained standing beside them, completely ignored, as usual. Then Lord Ashford continued. "Beauty, intelligence, grace, Everything a noble lady should be. More applause. Charlotte felt invisible. Again. Then her father laughed, and thankfully she inherited those qualities from her mother. The crowd laughed with him. Even Charlotte understood the implication. She wasn't included in that compliment. Her cheeks burned. Suddenly, she wanted nothing more than to leave. But her humiliation wasn't finished. Not even close. In fact, Lord Ashford continued, I am delighted to announce that negotiations regarding my eldest daughter are also nearing completion. Charlotte froze. What? Several nobles exchanged curious looks. Lord Ashford motioned toward an older man approaching through the crowd. Lord Blackwell, the wealthy widower. Charles Blackwell had silver hair, a heavy stomach, and grandchildren older than some members of the royal court. Charlotte's blood ran cold. She had seen him visit their estate repeatedly over the past month. She never imagined why. Lord Blackwell has been a dear friend of the family, her father said proudly. The older man smiled at Charlotte. She nearly felt sick. Father, she whispered. But Lord Ashford ignored her. I believe both families will soon reach a very satisfactory arrangement. The meaning was clear. Some nobles looked surprised. Others looked relieved. It wasn't their daughter. Lord Blackwell stepped closer. Lady Charlotte. His smile made her skin crawl. Charlotte could barely breathe. He was selling her. She finally understood. He wasn't trying to secure her future. He was trying to get rid of her. The realization hurt far more than she expected. Excuse me, she said quietly. Then she turned and walked away before anyone could stop her. She moved quickly through the crowd. Faster, faster. She needed air. She needed distance. She needed to escape the humiliation before tears betrayed her. But fate wasn't finished with her yet. As Charlotte reached the edge of the ballroom, the massive palace doors opened. Instantly, the room changed. Conversation stopped. Music died. Even the servants paused. Everyone turned toward the entrance. A man stepped inside. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in an impeccably tailored black formal coat. His dark hair was neatly combed, his expression calm, unreadable, commanding, and somehow terrifying, without raising his voice. Duke Alexander Ravenshire, the most powerful duke in the kingdom, the wealthiest nobleman in 3 provinces, the man women dreamed of marrying and men feared offending. Every noblewoman in the room seemed to straighten immediately. Isabella included. Charlotte expected him to acknowledge the king first. Instead, Alexander's grey eyes slowly swept across the ballroom, observing, calculating, noticing. Then his gaze settled on Lord Ashford for only a second. But Charlotte caught it. Something passed across the Duke's face. Not recognition, not friendship, something else. Then his attention moved onward, until his eyes found Charlotte. For a brief moment, neither looked away. Charlotte felt unexpectedly uneasy, not because of admiration, because it felt as though he were studying her, the way one might study a puzzle. Then Lord Ashford hurried forward. Your Grace, Alexander turned politely. Lord Ashford, her father beamed. What an honour. Allow me to introduce my daughter, Lady Isabella. Of course. Charlotte almost laughed. Even now, Isabella curtsied elegantly. Alexander acknowledged her with a respectful nod. Then silence followed, a strange silence, because he didn't continue the conversation. He didn't compliment Isabella. He didn't ask her to dance. He didn't seem interested at all. The ballroom waited. Then Alexander did something nobody expected. He walked past Isabella, past Lord Ashford, past half the gathered nobles, and stopped directly in front of Charlotte. She blinked once, twice. Certain she was imagining this, the Duke extended his hand. Lady Charlotte Ashford. The entire ballroom froze. Charlotte could practically hear hearts stopping around the room. May I have this dance? The ballroom remained frozen. Duke Alexander Ravenshire was still standing before Charlotte, with his hand extended, waiting. For several seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Charlotte was certain she had misunderstood him. There was no possible reason the most powerful duke in the kingdom would ask her to dance. Not her, not when Isabella stood only a few feet away, not when half the unmarried noblewomen in the ballroom would have gladly accepted in her place. "Lady Charlotte?" Alexander asked again. His voice was calm, gentle, but somehow impossible to ignore. Charlotte swallowed hard and placed her hand in his. The moment their fingers touched, whispers exploded. Throughout the ballroom, Alexander paid them no attention. He led her toward the dance floor while Charlotte struggled to understand what was happening. Behind her, she caught sight of her father's face. The shock alone was worth remembering. The orchestra resumed playing. The first notes of a waltz filled the ballroom. Alexander guided her into position with practiced ease. Charlotte expected him to say something charming. Most noblemen did. She expected compliments, flattery, perhaps an awkward attempt at conversation. Instead, Alexander simply began dancing. For several moments, neither spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, just unusual. "You seem surprised," Alexander said suddenly. Charlotte nearly missed a step. "Shouldn't I be?" A faint shadow of amusement crossed his face. Perhaps. The answer made her smile despite herself. For the first time all evening, she felt slightly less miserable. "Do you always help strangers?" Alexander asked. The question caught her off guard. "What?" His eyes drifted briefly toward the far side of the ballroom where the servant had dropped the tray earlier. Most people wouldn't have stopped. Most people should have. Alexander studied her for a moment. "Interesting." Charlotte frowned. That was a strange response. "Why?" He simply shook his head. "No reason." The answer felt incomplete, but before she could press him, the music ended. Applause echoed throughout the ballroom. Alexander released her hand and offered a bow. Charlotte curtsied, automatically, still confused, still wondering why any of this had happened. Then Lord Ashford appeared. "Your Grace!" His smile looked painfully forced. "What an unexpected honor!" Alexander straightened calmly. "Lord Ashford, I must say, I never imagined Charlotte would attract your attention." Charlotte flinched. The insult was so casual, her father barely seemed aware he had spoken it aloud. Alexander's gaze shifted briefly toward her before returning to Lord Ashford. "Why not?" The question hung in the air. Lord Ashford laughed nervously. "Well, surely you understand my meaning." Alexander's expression never changed. "No," he said simply. "I don't." Several nearby nobles exchanged glances. Charlotte almost smiled. Then Lord Ashford made one final attempt. "Perhaps your Grace would prefer my younger daughter, Isabella." Isabella stepped forward gracefully. Alexander acknowledged her politely. "Lady Isabella." Nothing more. No invitation, no lingering attention, no interest. The ballroom noticed immediately. Then Alexander turned back toward Charlotte. "Lady Charlotte." Her heart skipped. "Yes?" The Duke studied her for a moment. "May I call upon you tomorrow?" Gasps erupted throughout the room. Somewhere behind them a fan hit the floor. Charlotte stared at him. "Tomorrow?" His mouth twitched slightly. "That is generally how tomorrow works." For the first time all evening, Charlotte laughed, actually laughed. The sound surprised both of them. "Then yes," she said softly. "You may." Alexander inclined his head. "Excellent." Then he departed, leaving behind confusion, gossip, and absolute chaos. The next morning Charlotte woke to a completely different world. Servants whispered whenever she entered a room. Flowers arrived from noble families she had never met. Letters appeared from women who had ignored her for years. Everyone wanted to know the same thing. Why had Duke Ravenshire chosen Charlotte Ashford? Charlotte wanted the answer herself. Unfortunately, the strangest change came from her father. "Good morning, my dear Charlotte." She nearly dropped her teacup. Her father smiled warmly. "Did you sleep well?" Charlotte stared at him in disbelief. She couldn't remember the last time he had smiled at her. "Perfectly," she replied cautiously. The performance continued all day. "Charlotte, wear your blue dress." "Charlotte, sit beside me." "Charlotte." Tell us about your conversation with the Duke." It felt unnatural, almost frightening, because Charlotte knew the truth. Her father wasn't suddenly proud of her. He was interested in the Duke, and that realization hurt more than his insults ever had. Shortly before noon, a carriage bearing the Ravenshire crest arrived. A wave of excitement swept through Ashford Manor. When Alexander entered the drawing room, he looked exactly as he had the night before. Calm, composed, observant. Lord Ashford nearly glowed with excitement. "Your Grace." Alexander greeted everyone politely. Then his attention settled on Charlotte. "Lady Charlotte." Again she felt that strange sensation. He wasn't looking at her the way other men did. He wasn't admiring her. He wasn't flirting. He seemed curious, as though she were a question he hadn't finished answering. "Would you care for a walk?" he asked. Charlotte accepted immediately. The estate gardens were beautiful in spring. Flowers bloomed along winding paths while birds sang from nearby trees. For several minutes they walked quietly. Then Alexander spoke. "Has Lord Blackwell known your family long?" Charlotte glanced at him. "That's an unusual question." "Is it?" She smiled faintly. "Most gentlemen ask about favorite books." A hint of amusement touched his face. "I never claimed to be most gentlemen." Charlotte couldn't argue with that. "He's visited the estate several times this year," she answered. "Recently?" Again with the strange questions. "Yes." Alexander nodded thoughtfully. Then another question followed. "Does your father spend much time in the capital?" Charlotte slowed slightly. "Why are you asking these things?" For a moment Alexander looked toward the distant hills. Curiosity. That was all. No explanation. No elaboration. Just curiosity. The answer bothered Charlotte more than she cared to admit. Over the next several days, Alexander continued visiting, and the pattern continued. He listened carefully. He asked thoughtful questions. He remembered everything she said. Yet every so often another strange question appeared among the ordinary conversations. Questions about visitors. Questions about travel. Questions about estate affairs. Never enough to seem suspicious, but enough to feel unusual. At the same time, Charlotte began noticing changes in her father. He became increasingly nervous. Certain letters disappeared from his desk. He locked his study more often than usual, and several unfamiliar men began visiting the estate after dark. Once, Charlotte walked into a room unexpectedly and found her father abruptly ending a conversation. The moment he saw her, silence fell. The behavior unsettled her, but she couldn't explain why. Then one evening everything changed. Charlotte was returning to her room after dinner when she passed her father's study. A sliver of light shone beneath the door. As she walked by, voices drifted through the opening. She wasn't trying to eavesdrop. Then she heard the Duke's name. "Ravenshire has been asking questions." Charlotte froze. Her father's voice sounded tense. "What about the records?" Another man asked. Silence followed. Then her father answered. "They're hidden." Charlotte's heart began pounding. "Records? What records?" Before she could hear more, the study door closed completely. The conversation vanished, but the damage was done. For the first time, Charlotte felt genuinely suspicious. Something was wrong. She didn't know what, but somehow Duke Ravenshire and her father were connected to it. That night, long after the household had gone to sleep, Charlotte stood outside her father's study, her heart hammered against her ribs. She had never disobeyed him like this before. Never, but she couldn't ignore the feeling that something important was being hidden. With trembling hands, she unlocked the door and slipped inside. Moonlight spilled across the room. She searched carefully. Drawers, cabinets, shelves. At first she found nothing. Then she noticed a loose wooden panel behind one of the bookcases. Curious, she pressed against it. Click! A hidden compartment opened. Inside sat several ledgers bearing royal seals. Charlotte opened the first one. Her eyes widened. Missing funds, forged signatures, false records. She didn't understand everything, but she understood enough. Her father was hiding something terrible. Then footsteps echoed behind her. Slow, deliberate. Charlotte froze. The study door closed softly. She turned. Lord Ashford stood in the doorway. His face was completely expressionless. No smile, no warmth, no performance, just anger. Then he spoke. "I warned you to stay away from matters beyond your understanding." Charlotte froze. The ledgers remained open in her trembling hands. For several seconds neither she nor her father moved. The study felt suffocatingly small. "You stole it," Charlotte whispered. Lord Ashford slowly closed the door behind him. "Put the ledgers down." His voice was calm, but there was something beneath it now, something she had never heard before. "The money was for war widows." Charlotte's eyes filled with disbelief. "For orphaned children." Silence. "How could you do that?" Her father's jaw tightened. "You know nothing about what it takes to preserve a family name." "A family name?" Charlotte almost laughed. "You stole from people who lost husbands and fathers." For the first time, genuine anger flashed across Lord Ashford's face. "Everything I did was for this family." "No." Charlotte shook her head. "Everything you did was for yourself." The words landed harder than she expected. Her father took a step forward. "Give me the ledgers." Charlotte stepped back. "No." His expression darkened. Charlotte. For 22 years she would have obeyed. For 22 years she would have lowered her eyes and apologized. "Not tonight." "No." The study door suddenly opened. Both turned. Duke Alexander Ravenshire entered as though he had been expected. Lord Ashford went pale instantly. "Your Grace." Alexander's gaze moved from Charlotte's reddened face to the ledgers in her hands, then to Lord Ashford. "I see we're finished pretending." Silence swallowed the room. Lord Ashford laughed bitterly. "So that's it." His eyes moved toward Charlotte. "This was never about her." Charlotte's heart tightened despite herself. "At first?" Alexander said quietly. "No." The admission hurt more than she wanted it to. But before the disappointment could settle, Alexander continued, "At first I noticed her because she was the only honest person in that ballroom." No one spoke. When a servant dropped a tray and everyone laughed, Charlotte was the only person who helped. Alexander's eyes never left hers. Everyone else saw someone beneath them. She saw someone who needed help. Charlotte remembered the moment suddenly. The frightened servant, the broken glass. She had almost forgotten it. "That made me curious," Alexander said. "Then I began paying attention." His voice softened. "The more I learned, the more impossible it became to ignore what kind of woman you are." For the first time since meeting him, Charlotte saw no mystery in his eyes, no hidden agenda, no unanswered question, just honesty, and somehow that frightened her more. Lord Ashford scoffed. "Spare me?" Alexander's expression hardened again. "The Crown has spent months investigating missing relief funds." Charlotte looked toward him. "You were investigating father." Alexander nodded slowly. "I suspected him." His gaze shifted briefly toward Lord Ashford. "But suspicion isn't proof." Charlotte finally understood. The strange questions, the unusual visits, the interest in Lord Blackwell, the hidden concern, everything suddenly made sense. "And me?" she asked quietly. Alexander looked at her. "I needed someone I could trust." The answer should have upset her. Instead it didn't, because she knew now what came after it. "Then I made the mistake of getting to know you." For a moment the room seemed to disappear. Lord Ashford looked away first. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed from the hallway. Guards! Royal Guards! The investigation was over. The truth had finally caught up to him. When the guards entered, Lord Ashford's confidence vanished completely. "Charlotte!" His voice sounded smaller now, desperate. She turned toward him. "Tell them I did it for the family." The request stunned her. He still didn't understand. He still believed reputation mattered more than people. "No." The single word echoed through the room. Her father's face fell. "Charlotte." "No." She shook her head. "You spent my entire life telling me I wasn't enough." Tears burned behind her eyes. "You called me worthless." Silence. "And now you want me to lie for you?" The guard stepped forward. Lord Ashford stared at her for several seconds. Then for the first time in her life, he had no answer. Within moments he was gone. The study suddenly felt empty. Charlotte stood motionless, staring at the door after it closed. She expected grief. She expected heartbreak. Instead she felt relief. Alexander remained beside her, but said nothing. He seemed to understand that this moment belonged to her. Finally Charlotte spoke. "I spent years trying to earn his approval." Alexander's expression softened. "I know." A sad smile touched her lips. "The strange thing is, I don't think he ever deserved it." For the first time, Alexander smiled openly. "No," he agreed. "He didn't. The following weeks changed everything." The stolen funds were recovered. War widows received the support that had been taken from them. Orphanages reopened. Families received long overdue assistance. And everywhere Charlotte went, people thanked her. Not because she belonged to a noble family, not because she had caught a duke's attention, because she had done the right thing. One rainy afternoon, while sorting through boxes in the attic, Charlotte discovered something unexpected, a small wooden chest bearing her mother's initials. Her breath caught immediately. Eleanor Ashford. She carefully opened it. Inside rested old photographs, jewelry, a few dried flowers, and a sealed envelope addressed to Charlotte with her mother's handwriting. Tears filled her eyes before she even opened it. She broke the seal carefully and unfolded the letter. "My dearest Charlotte, if you are reading this, then I am no longer there to tell you these things myself. There is something I need you to remember. The world will not always recognize your worth. Some people only value what shines the brightest. Others mistake kindness for weakness. Do not believe them. You are stronger than you know, and one day someone will see your value even when others refuse to. Never allow another person's blindness to become your truth. You were never born to earn love. You were born worthy of it. With all my love, Mother." By the time Charlotte finished reading, tears streamed down her face. For years she had measured herself against her father's approval. For years she had believed his opinion defined her. Now she finally understood the truth. He had been wrong all along. Months later, the royal spring ball returned once more. The same chandeliers, the same orchestra, the same magnificent ballroom, but this time everything felt different. This time, Charlotte entered with confidence. She no longer searched the room for approval. She no longer feared comparisons. She no longer felt invisible. "You're quiet," Alexander said beside her. Charlotte smiled. "Just thinking. Dangerous habit." She laughed softly, then looked around the ballroom. "Do you know what's strange?" Alexander raised an eyebrow. "What?" Charlotte's eyes drifted toward the dance floor. "For years I believed there was something wrong with me." Alexander stopped walking. He turned toward her completely. "There never was." The certainty in his voice stole her breath. For a moment neither spoke. Then the orchestra began playing. Alexander extended his hand. "Lady Charlotte Ashford." Her smile widened. "Yes, Your Grace." His grey eyes held hers. "May I have this dance?" This time there were no whispers, no humiliation, no cruel comparisons, only happiness. Charlotte placed her hand in his. As they stepped onto the dance floor, she finally understood something that had taken 22 years to learn. The little girl who spent her life being told she was worthless had never lacked value. She had simply been surrounded by people too blind to see it. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more emotional royal romance stories filled with love, betrayal, redemption, and unforgettable happy endings. And tell me in the comments, if you were Charlotte, would you have forgiven Lord Ashford, or would you have walked away forever?
Charlotte spent most of her life trying to earn the approval of a man who had already decided she would never be enough. But in the end, she discovered something far more important. True worth doesn't come from the opinions of others. It comes from knowing who you are, even when the people around you refuse to see it. And sometimes the greatest victory isn't proving your value to those who doubted you. It's finally realizing you never needed their approval in the first place. If you enjoyed this story, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next emotional royal romance. And now I want to hear from you.